Such a pleasure to be with you all tonight. I've been studying the industry. I've interviewed some of you before the event and chatted with many people tonight. I'm just so impressed with educators in general, especially with what's been going on the last few years. It's not been easy, and it's good to be in the room with so many heroes. Thank you for all you do. Please give yourselves a round of applause. I'm here, yes, to talk about relationships, and I know what some of you are thinking. I don't need this. I've been making relationships my whole life. And besides, Michael, relationships are supposed to be natural. You're not supposed to have to engineer them and make them happen. And yet there are some workarounds and some hacks that you can use to make relationships work for you in ways that perhaps you've never experienced. I'm going to run it down for you right now. Organic relationships are natural, right? And they happen over time. And they're based on common ground, either common ground that you already have identified with the other person or common ground that you hope will be cultivated. Relationships are also based on something advertisers call impressions. So the number of touches, not physical touches, but emotional touches, conversational touches that you can have with somebody will help build that relationship. I remember, and I'm flashing back to school days because I'm with educators, but I remember growing up in Trenton, Michigan, Wayne County, and making impressions, early communication impressions with, say, police officers. We used to wave to the police officers with all our fingers. And they wave back. And I don't know that kids do that anymore. Those impressions are lost. Those relationships may be lost. It's the reach out and the reach back, that creates that connection. And the better we are at it, the better the relationships become. So influence is being traded. Do you have another microphone in the back? Do you have a second mic? Yeah, thank you very much. Influence is being traded to create these quality impressions and then therefore better relationships. But, and here's the big but, yes please?
You don't need a microphone, we can hear you really well.
Thank you very much. You may get your wish in just a second. Thank you. But, and here's the big but, we are now in, and I've heard this from a number of you tonight, we are in extraordinarily sensitive times. And you know this. Things have changed. And people are not like they were 2 years ago, 3 years ago, last year. They're more vocal, they're more assertive. And it's fraying what might have been a good chance to have a relationship with people. It happens very quickly. These sensitive times are steeped in doubt, fear, and even misinformation. Think about these phrases. They didn't exist 10 years ago. Phrases like, put myself out there, safe space. How about this one? Okay if I call you? Like we never used to ask permission to call people, we just did it, right? But everybody's fearful now that the rejection and the sensitivity is ratcheted so high that we don't want to put ourselves out there. There's a risk to it. And we've become risk adverse. And I think to our own peril. Relationships then have become a risky proposition. It's easier not to have the relationship if you can get away with it. We all learn about this differently. Industries learn it, corporations learn it, school boards learn it, school districts learn it. Each of you has learned relationships. I learned it in an 80s rock band. I toured the country in a band with my brothers. We opened for acts like Rick Springfield, Corey Hart, Joan Jett. And I had to get along with 3 guys that I had sibling rivalry with. It just could not be, it wouldn't go away. And by the way, we also had to develop relationships with my parents who didn't understand what the hell we were doing, and we had to explain that to them every other week. In the 90s, I was in the telecom business. I found myself making 50 outbound calls a day to people I would never meet to get them to cut a PO, purchase order, for equipment I was selling. And I did it all without what behavioral psychologists call nonverbal cues, like things you could see. Because when you're on the phone, all you've got is words, right? And then later, as my career developed, I learned I could develop relationships where I could sell a total stranger, say a $10 book, or a 45-minute keynote, My keynote is not that long tonight. Or how about a 6-month consulting deal that was renewed 8 times, a 4-year arrangement at a company? It's only because I was able to cultivate and curate that relationship in real time. So we all have ways that we do this and figure it out. So I'm going to share with you some tips for practical tips for managing relationships. And I think the first one that we have to realize is that not everything we deal with every day is existential. Like, we tend to dramatize stuff. If you don't believe this, listen to the weather report tomorrow, and it'll tell you, bad things are going to happen because of the weather. And it's always a disaster coming our way. It's never just a storm anymore. It's a cyclone or whatever they call it. So we tend to use hyperbola and superlatives to kind of ratchet up the drama. You're flying tomorrow on the plane. If it's full, the flight attendant will say, we've got an extremely full flight today. What's the difference between a full flight and an extremely full flight? Torque, energy, nervousness on the part of the passengers. That's what. So, a couple ground rules here, and we were talking at our table about how school boards can arrange, like, you can give training to school boards to improve etiquette and decorum at meetings. Could you train the public to have decorum at meetings? That's an interesting question. A couple of you already have an opinion about that. One idea is to always bring the data, not the drama. Easier said than done. Another idea is to, I've heard as QTIP, or quit taking it personally, right? A lot of times these comments that they're making, they're not ad hominem. They're not against you. They're just frustration, right? We know this. And also finding balance. You can find humor in everything. But if you're taking what you're doing so seriously that you can't enjoy it once in a while, it sets the tone for everybody else. Even in hospitals, they have a thing called hospital humor, right? So here come the practical tips. How about this? We think of relationships as things that have to happen slow and organically, but what if we could speed up relationships? And I'm not the first one to think of this. Stephen Covey's son wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. Could you get somebody to trust you faster if you knew what to do, if you had tools for this? And what are the benefits of having someone trust you faster, right? The idea is that you would keep ahead of the curve. You would keep ahead of the bad developments that are about to happen. So you would speed up to keep up. There's an old quote that a lie can go around the world faster than the truth can get its pants on. Now, it's chased to Jonathan Swift. I'm pretty sure he didn't say it exactly like that, but that's the essence of the sentiment. So what I'm asking you to consider doing is improving, yes, your personal brand, but also how about the school board brand? How can we do this? Well, athletic teams win on both offense and defense. So let's talk about both. Offensively, this is you now promoting the message. This is you being proactive about the relationship. How about the art of the compliment, which has become, is going away from us fast. Everybody's so sensitive about compliments, and they're interpreted in wildly ways, and a lot of people don't know how to deliver compliments. There's 2 types of compliments, ladies and gentlemen. There's something called the outside compliment, which is based on a visual trigger. You see it, and then you say it. I like your haircut. Bless you. That color looks good on you, right? Looks like you got some sun over the weekend. Looks great, right? You see it, and then you say it. Does society like these types of compliments? Yes or no? No. Well, a lot of people do. A lot of people do. Maybe some don't, but most people do. But they don't hold a candle to inside compliments. And then you're talking about things like the person's energy, their spirit, principles, values, right? You might be the most honest person I've ever worked with. I'm so glad you're on our team. See, it's a much different sentiment. Takes a little bit longer to deliver. You wouldn't do it in passing in a hallway. You'd sit kneecap to kneecap, eyeball to eyeball, and deliver that compliment. And that's how you can win on offense. You can win on defense when people come to your meetings and complain. Or they complain in email, or they complain on phone calls. So the first trick for handling complaints is to slow the complaint down, which is counterintuitive because when somebody punches you in the gut, reflexively, you want to punch them in the gut. It's not about being nice to the other person when they're hurting you. So this idea of slowing it down is tremendously effective. And I didn't believe it when I heard it, and then I tried it a few times, and I'm like, gosh, this works like magic. So the person calls, and remember, think about how this sets up now. They've been locked and loaded all night. They went to bed with this ambush in mind, right? You don't even know it's coming at 9:05 the next morning, but they're locked and loaded, they're ready for you. And they start the dump. And you say, excuse me, I didn't get your name. Could you give me your name and maybe the spelling? And there's a little uncomfortable moment, and they say to themselves, oh my gosh, I didn't even tell them who I am. I'm so angry, I forgot to tell them who I am. And then the guy goes, Tom, with a T. Right? But you've slowed it down. Psychologists call this reframing, right? But again, it's counterintuitive. You don't think because you're under fire, right? And then you would ask questions. You keep showing interest. When you show interest in others, others will eventually show interest in you. This is the law of reciprocity. It works every single time, but you've got to hang in there. Tell me more. Who did you talk to? When did this happen? Do you have a record of it? Do you have something you can show me other than what you remember? Do you have a video, photograph, something like this, right? This is data, not drama. And then you do something exceptionally unique if you've got your act together. You thank the person for the complaint. You see, they think you're either going to defend the complaint or you're going to somehow refute it. And when you do neither, the dance goes away. It takes two to tango, and you're not dancing. You're just saying, thank you very much. I think someone at our table said that. You got to thank the person for reaching out. And what are they going to say to that? And I did a video about this. I was speaking to a Chamber of Commerce in Southern Indiana. And if you just search on YouTube, my full name, the word complaint or complain, it's free. Just look it up. And I'll run you through the whole demo. But it just takes all the wind out of their sails, when you thank them for, I sincerely, this has been how about this? This has been the best phone call I've had all month. Can you say that to somebody that just read you the riot act? Maybe not. And then finally you try to resolve the complaint, of course. But here's what I've learned about people who complain. They often aren't interested in resolution. They just want to complain. And that's a gift if you can realize that early in the game. Sometimes I actually say that to them. I use humor a lot. I say, you just wanted to complain about this, didn't you? And they go, yep. I go, good, thank you for calling. And we're done, man, it's great. You got to read the situation right to do it. Some of you may know my old friend Jim Ellison. He is the former mayor of Royal Oak. Royal Oak's in the house? Hey, how are you? I recognize you, I think. How are you? I don't think Jim Ellison has ever lost an election. He ran unopposed in Royal Oak more times than I can count. He's moved up the ladder now. And Jim Ellison, I've been telling this story all over the world. He's at a State of the City address, and somebody says to him, a bunch of people in the room, including press, and it's Q&A, somebody stands up and starts launching into Mayor Ellison, launching into him. And Jim listened, he nodded his head, and the guy eventually had to take a breath after a couple of minutes, and Jim says, thank you for your comments. He says, I really appreciate you being here tonight. I understand you're unhappy. He says, here's what I'd like you to know. My job as mayor of Royal Oak is not to make everyone in the city happy. My job is to make decisions that are in the best long-term interest of our city. He got a standing ovation from everybody else in the room, and the other guys sat down. Isn't that a great line? You can have it, man. Use it. So, as I wrap up, relationship success is an interesting thing. Even the word success is interesting because success is one of those rare words that means one thing and the exact opposite. Success means leading the pack, but it also means following behind. I know that you're interested in leadership succession in your organization, so let's work on our internal relationships as well. Let's just not paint the bad guy as the outsider or the outlier in the community. We've got work to do within the organization, I think you would agree. I will also take a couple of questions, and then I have a quick goodbye story for you. We're going to keep you right on schedule tonight. Is there anything you'd like to, anything that flagged for you tonight as we talked about these types of things? Yes, please.
Michael, when they come in mass, you could have 20, 30, maybe even 40 people coming in, and they are a collective group. They've had their little organizational meeting at the coffee house or bar prior to coming in,
Yeah.
and they're going to be going back there afterwards. How do you quell the tide?
It's your game board. It's your meeting. And to the extent that you can have a rule set and some sort of protocol, I used the word decorum earlier, I like that word because it sounds civilized, that they have to play by your rules. It doesn't matter how many there are, only one person can talk at a time. You have a clock in some cases. The clock is your friend, right? Time is your friend. And in worst case scenario, hopefully you've got a sergeant at arms or some way to enforce problems. But I don't concern myself with the number of people. I think it's initially a shocker, but eventually it all comes down to communication. I know it sounds easier to talk about this than to actually do it, so I appreciate your question. Anything else? All right, quick goodbye story. And then to tie together a lot of things we talked about today, I think you'll like this story. So I get on an airplane, and I like to sit in the aisle seat, and that's where I'm at. And I hear I'm watching people come onto the plane, and I'm playing that game that you play on airplanes, which is, I wonder who's sitting next to me today. Have you ever played that game? And a beautiful woman gets on the plane, and I thought, well, maybe she's going to be sitting next to me, and she walks, and she goes by. It's not her. And then a big guy, supersized guy, gets on, and I think it might be him. And he walks by, it's not him either. And then I hear my seatmate before I see him, because he's talking on the phone. I don't know how this happened, but we talk on the phone louder than we do in real life. And I used to be super annoyed by this until I realized you can learn a lot of personal things about people just by listening to their personal conversation. So he gets to my chair, and I hear him, and he's saying goodbye to a child. And that's cool. Dad's leaving home, that's fine. And he's got two pieces of luggage. One's going to go in the overhead bin, the other one's going to go under his seat. They both have a luggage tag of a Michigan manufacturer. I recognize the name of the company. He probably works there. Now he's saying goodbye to a second child. He sits down. He's saying goodbye to a third child who's crying into the phone so loud I can hear the kid from my seat. And an interesting thing happens. The flight attendant says, she's closing the boarding door. You have to put your cell phones away, which means this guy has to hang up on the crying child. Very sad. And he says, Daddy's got to go, Daddy's got to go, Daddy's got to go. And click, and Daddy's gone. And I turned to my seatmate, and I said to him, I felt bad for him, and I said to him, Daddy's leaving home, huh? And he does this big sigh like the weight of the world's leaving his shoulders, and he says, yeah, he says, my kids do not like me to leave home. And I said, how many children do you have? And he said, 3. And I said, what are their names? He said, Sally, Sandy, and Scotty. Scotty's the oldest, and he was the one that was crying the loudest. I said, how old are they? He said, 4, 5. Did I tell you the ages? And then I said, do you work at that company, that tag is on the bag? And he said, yeah, I sure do. I said, why do you travel? He says, well, I have to travel 16 days a month because I'm sales manager at the company. And I said, well, why do you have to travel 16 days? And he says, because I got to make sure my people are working a full day. And then he got this strange expression on his face because he's realized he's given a complete stranger a lot of personal information. I now know the names and ages of his kids. I know how old they are. I know where he works, how often he travels, and I know his biggest problem at work. He knows nothing about me, and it's time to play catch up. So he looks at me and he goes, I'm sorry. He says, I didn't get your name. And I held out my hand first because I know the person who holds out their hand first has influence in any interaction. I held out my hand and I said, my name is Michael Angelo Caruso. And he shakes my hand and he says, Michael Angelo Caruso. He says, that's a great name. He says, what do you do for a living? I said, well, I teach sales managers how to get their people to work a full day. He says, can I have a card? And the lady in front of us says, I want one too. So you see how all of these techniques can be tied together, put together, to help you be more proactive with relationships. I hope you've enjoyed my presentation today. Thank you for all the great work you do in the community. I look forward to seeing who's going to win an award tonight. Thank you very much.